Charleston, South Carolina, March 1851. When Colonel William Thornton returned from military service in Washington to his Ashley River plantation, he expected to find his wife recovered from childbirth and ready to present him with the son who would inherit his name and his fortune. His wife, Catherine Thornton, had written him during his absence, informing him of the birth of twin boys in February. The letters had been brief, mentioning only that both infants were healthy and that Catherine was recovering well. The colonel had imagined a triumphant homecoming, meeting his heirs for the first time, beginning the process of grooming them to continue the Thornton legacy. What awaited him instead would shatter every assumption he held about his marriage, his family, and his carefully constructed position in Charleston society. When Catherine brought the twins to meet him in the grand parlor of Thornton Hall, the colonel found himself staring at two infants who could not possibly have the same father. One child was pale, with the light hair and blue eyes common to the Thornton family line. The other was unmistakably darker, with features that revealed African ancestry, impossible to conceal or explain away. The silence that followed stretched between husband and wife like a chasm neither could bridge. Catherine stood holding both infants, her face a mask of resignation, and something else the colonel couldn't identify. Not shame, exactly, not defiance. Something more complex, as if she'd spent the past month preparing for this moment, and had concluded that no preparation could make it bearable. Before we continue with the story of the Thornton family and the confession that would destroy one of Charleston's most prominent households, we need you to join this investigation. Subscribe to History in Chains and hit that notification bell, because stories like this, where the facade of Southern gentility concealed secrets that challenged the very foundations of slave society, deserve to be told. Leave a comment telling us what you think. We want to know your perspective on how slavery created situations where every relationship was tainted by power, where love and violence became indistinguishable, where families were built on lies that eventually demanded truth. The Thornton family had been among South Carolina's plantation aristocracy for 3 generations. William Thornton's grandfather had established the family fortune through rice cultivation in the 1770s, building it on the labor of enslaved people, whose names and histories were recorded only as property in ledgers and wills. By 1851, the Thorntons owned over 300 enslaved people across multiple plantations and were considered one of Charleston's most prestigious families. Colonel William Thornton was 42 years old, a career military officer who balanced his service obligations with management of the family's agricultural interests. He'd married Catherine Beaumont in 1846, when she was 19 and he was 37. Catherine came from another prominent Charleston family, though one with less wealth than the Thorntons. The marriage had been arranged by their families, as most marriages in their social class were, combining bloodlines and consolidating property in ways that benefited both dynasties. By all outward appearances, the marriage had been successful. Catherine managed Thornton Hall with efficiency expected of women in her position. She supervised the household staff, entertained guests appropriately, and maintained the social connections necessary for a family of their standing. William provided financially, protected the family name, and fulfilled his role as patriarch. They were, to Charleston society, an ideal couple representing everything Southern civilization aspired to be. What that society didn't see, couldn't see, was the reality behind the facade. The marriage was not a partnership. It was an arrangement where Catherine had no power, no voice. no existence except as extension of her husband's will. William was not cruel by the standards of his time and place. He didn't beat Catherine. He didn't publicly humiliate her. But he also didn't consider her a person with autonomous thoughts, feelings, or desires. She was property, albeit elevated property, whose function was to produce heirs and maintain household order. In this context, what happened between Catherine and an enslaved man named Samuel was simultaneously inevitable and impossible. Inevitable because slavery created situations where proximity and power imbalances made such relationships occur constantly. Impossible because the consequences of discovery were so severe that attempting such a relationship required courage, bordering on madness. Samuel had been born on the Thornton plantation in 1828, making him 23 years old in 1851. He was the son of two enslaved people who'd both died before he reached adulthood. He'd been trained as a house servant from childhood, learning to move invisibly through the spaces where white people lived, attending to their needs while maintaining the fiction that he had no thoughts or feelings about what he observed. By 1850, Samuel worked primarily as the colonel's personal valet, though this role expanded to include general household maintenance when William was away on military assignments. This meant Samuel spent significant time in proximity to Catherine, often alone with her in situations where the usual social boundaries that separated enslaved people from white women were temporarily relaxed. Catherine noticed Samuel in ways she wasn't supposed to notice enslaved men. She noticed his intelligence, evident in how quickly he learned tasks and how carefully he managed household affairs when the colonel was absent. She noticed his kindness, shown in how he treated the other enslaved people working in the house. She noticed, though she tried not to, that he was handsome in ways her husband wasn't and never had been. Samuel noticed Catherine too, not as mistress or owner, though she was technically both. He noticed her loneliness, the way she would stand at windows staring at nothing, the careful blankness of her expression when the colonel issued orders she couldn't refuse. He noticed her intelligence being wasted on household management that could have been handled by others. He noticed that she was trapped, perhaps not as completely as he was trapped, but trapped nonetheless in a life she hadn't chosen and couldn't escape. What began between them started as conversation. Brief exchanges when Samuel was attending to household duties and Catherine happened to be present. Discussion of books Catherine was reading, ideas she couldn't share with anyone else because women of her class weren't supposed to have intellectual interests. Samuel revealed that he could read, a dangerous admission that could result in severe punishment if discovered, but one that created a connection between them that transcended the power dynamics that should have made genuine communication impossible. The conversations became longer, more personal. Catherine would find excuses to be where Samuel was working. Samuel would arrange his tasks to maximize time when Catherine might be alone. They were playing with fire, both knowing the consequences if discovered, but unable to stop the progression of a relationship that was filling needs neither had acknowledged until the other appeared. In August 1850, while Colonel Thornton was in Washington on extended military assignment, the relationship became physical. Whether this was rape or consent is a question that has no clear answer within the context of slavery. Samuel was enslaved. Catherine owned him. Any sexual relationship between them occurred within a power structure that made genuine consent questionable, regardless of the feelings involved. Yet Catherine's journal, discovered after her death and sealed in family archives until its release in 1987, suggests the relationship was consensual by her understanding, though she recognized the complexity. She wrote, "What we do violates every law, moral and civil, but what my marriage is also violates what I believe humans should be to each other. William owns me as surely as I own Samuel, though the law pretends there is difference. In Samuel's arms, I feel something I have never felt, something like freedom, though we are both prisoners in different ways. We are committing sins that could destroy us both. Yet I cannot stop. I do not want to stop." Samuel left no written record of his perspective. Enslaved people rarely had opportunity to document their intimate thoughts, especially regarding relationships with white women that could result in their execution if discovered. Whether he felt genuine affection for Catherine, or whether he was responding to a situation where refusal might have triggered punishment, is unknown and unknowable from surviving evidence. What is known is that the relationship continued through the fall of 1850. Catherine became pregnant in September. She didn't realize it immediately, though by October the signs were unmistakable. She faced a choice that had no good outcome: confess to her husband and face disgrace, divorce, possible criminal charges, and the absolute certainty of Samuel's execution, or conceal the relationship, hope the child would be light enough to pass as the Colonel's, and continue the deception indefinitely. Catherine chose concealment. She wrote to William in November, informing him that she believed she was pregnant. William returned home briefly in December, spent one night with his wife, then departed again for Washington. This single night would provide plausible explanation for any child born in late February or early March, allowing Catherine to claim the pregnancy resulted from William's brief visit. But Catherine faced a problem she couldn't solve through timing alone. She knew there was a possibility, perhaps even a likelihood, that the child would show visible evidence of African ancestry. Mixed-race children born to white mothers and black fathers often displayed physical features that revealed their heritage. If the child was noticeably dark, no amount of explanation would convince her husband or Charleston society that William was the father. Catherine's journal entries from December 1850 through February 1851 reveal a woman living in constant terror. She wrote of nightmares about the birth, about her husband discovering the truth, about Samuel being killed because of their relationship. She wrote about considering suicide, about considering running away, about considering confessing everything and accepting consequences. But she did none of these things. She waited, paralyzed by fear and by faint hope that perhaps the child would be light enough to pass. In January 1851, Catherine discovered she was carrying twins. This complicated everything further. Twin births were rare but not impossible to explain, but 2 children meant 2 opportunities for the truth to be visible. Catherine's terror intensified as the pregnancy progressed, and her body grew larger than expected, even accounting for twins. The twins were born on February 8, 1851. Catherine's labor was attended by a midwife, an enslaved woman named Ruth, who delivered dozens of babies on the Thornton plantation. Ruth had seen complicated situations before. She'd seen babies born to enslaved women, who were clearly fathered by white men. She'd seen the resulting children navigate the impossible position of being simultaneously black and white in a society that recognized only rigid categories. But Ruth had never seen what Catherine delivered that February morning. 2 boys, born minutes apart. The first emerged with light skin, blue eyes, and hair that would clearly be blonde when it grew. The second emerged darker. his skin tone unmistakably revealing mixed ancestry, his features showing African heritage that couldn't be concealed or explained away. Ruth understood immediately what had occurred and what it meant. She looked at Catherine with a mixture of pity and horror, knowing that discovery would mean death for Samuel and destruction for Catherine. She said nothing to the other household staff. She cleaned both infants, wrapped them separately, and asked Catherine what names she wanted recorded. Catherine named the lighter child William after his supposed father. The darker child she named James. She held both infants and wept, knowing that the moment William returned and saw them, her carefully constructed concealment would collapse entirely. Catherine had 1 month before the colonel was expected home. She spent that month in agony, holding her sons, knowing that she loved both of them, but that acknowledging one might mean destroying the other. She wrote letters to William, describing the births in vague terms, mentioning that both boys were healthy, but providing no physical descriptions. She hoped, irrationally, that perhaps William wouldn't notice the difference. Perhaps he would be so pleased to have sons that the obvious impossibility of them having the same father would somehow be overlooked. But Catherine knew this was fantasy. She knew William would see immediately. She knew she would have to choose between confession and attempting to maintain an impossible lie. Her journal entries from February and March 1851 show a woman preparing for inevitable confrontation, trying to decide whether honesty or deception offered any path to survival for herself, for her children, and for Samuel. Just when we thought we'd seen it all, Catherine's impossible situation reaches the moment of truth. If this story is affecting you, share this video with someone who appreciates complex historical narratives. Hit that like button to support our content, and subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happened when the colonel finally came home, because the confrontation that followed would reveal truths about slavery, marriage, and power that Charleston society preferred to keep hidden. Colonel William Thornton arrived home on March 15th, 1851. Catherine met him at the entrance to Thornton Hall with the same composure she'd maintained throughout her ordeal. She'd decided, finally, that lies were impossible, and that confession, however devastating, was the only option that allowed her to maintain any dignity. She brought the twins to the parlor where William waited. She placed both children in his arms. She watched his face as he looked from one infant to the other, saw understanding dawn, saw his expression shift from confusion to comprehension to rage so intense, she stepped back instinctively. "Explain this," William said, his voice quiet and more frightening for its control. "Explain to me how I have one son, who is clearly mine, and another who is clearly not." Catherine had rehearsed this moment in her mind hundreds of times. She'd imagined pleading, imagined defiance, imagined silence. What emerged was simple truth, delivered without decoration. "I have been unfaithful to you. James is not your son. William is your son. I am guilty of adultery, and I accept whatever consequences you determine appropriate." William set both infants down with surprising gentleness, given his visible rage. He stood, facing Catherine, and asked the question she'd been dreading. "Who is the father?" Catherine hesitated. Naming Samuel would mean his death. Not naming him might mean William would suspect every enslaved man on the property. Might mean punishment falling on innocents. There was no good answer, only different forms of destruction. "I cannot tell you," Catherine said. "I will accept divorce. I will accept being sent away from society. I will accept whatever public humiliation you wish to impose. But I cannot name him because you will kill him, and while I have sinned, he does not deserve death for it." William's response was immediate. "You think you can refuse me? You think you have power in this situation? I will discover who he is. I will question every male slave on this property until I learn the truth. And when I discover his identity, I will make an example of him that will be discussed throughout South Carolina for generations." Catherine realized her attempt to protect Samuel through silence would fail. William would conduct his investigation. He would eventually identify Samuel, either through process of elimination or because other enslaved people, under threat of punishment, would reveal what they'd observed or suspected. Her silence would only delay inevitable discovery, while causing suffering for others who'd done nothing wrong. "It was Samuel," Catherine said quietly. "Your valet. The relationship was my fault. I initiated it. I pursued it. He resisted initially, but I persisted. If anyone deserves punishment, it is me, not him." This was partially true. Catherine had made the first overtures, had created opportunities for the relationship to develop. But whether Samuel resisted in any meaningful way was questionable. He'd been enslaved. Refusing Catherine's advances would have been dangerous regardless of any personal feelings. Catherine was attempting to shield him from the worst consequences by claiming full responsibility. But the attempt was futile in a system where enslaved men accused of sexual relationships with white women were executed regardless of circumstances. William's face showed no emotion now. The rage had been replaced by cold calculation. He was considering options, weighing consequences, determining how to manage a situation that threatened his family's reputation and his own position in Charleston society. "You have destroyed this family," William said finally. "You have destroyed my name. You have created a situation that cannot be resolved in any satisfactory manner. That child," he gestured at James, "is evidence of your sin and of my humiliation. He cannot remain in this house. He cannot be raised as my son. He cannot be acknowledged as a Thornton." "He is your son's twin brother," Catherine said. "He is half William's blood regardless of who fathered him. You cannot simply dispose of him." "I can do exactly that," William replied. "He is, legally, a slave. Your son by a slave father is a slave. He has no rights, no claims, no protection under law. I can sell him, give him away, or kill him, and no authority will intervene." This was technically true. South Carolina law in 1851 held that children born to white mothers and black fathers were legally black and could be enslaved. The law was rarely enforced because such births were uncommon among white women of Catherine's class, but the legal framework existed, and William could invoke it. Catherine had not considered this possibility. She'd imagined William might send James away, might arrange for him to be raised elsewhere, but she hadn't imagined he would enslave his wife's child. The realization that her son could be legally reduced to property struck her with force that made her physically ill. "You cannot," she whispered. "He is an infant. He is innocent." "He is evidence," William corrected. "Evidence that must be removed from this household if I am to maintain any standing in society. You will never see him again after today. You will never speak of him. He will cease to exist as far as this family is concerned." Catherine fell to her knees, begging, "Please, whatever you do to me, however you punish me, do not harm him. He did nothing wrong. He deserves better than slavery." "He deserves what the law says he deserves," William said. which is slavery. He will be sent to one of the rice plantations. He will be raised as a field worker. He will never know he had a white mother, or that he was born in this house. That is more mercy than you deserve me to show." "And Samuel?" Catherine asked, already knowing the answer. "Samuel will be executed, publicly, as warning to any other slave who might consider similar actions. His death will be slow. It will be painful, and you will witness it, so you understand completely what your actions have caused." Samuel was arrested that evening. He was held in the plantation's jail, a small building where enslaved people accused of infractions were confined before punishment. William did not conduct a trial. No trial was legally required for enslaved people, accused of crimes against white people. William simply ordered Samuel's execution, scheduled for 3 days later, to allow time for word to spread and for enslaved people from surrounding plantations to be brought to witness. Catherine was confined to her room. William took both infants, intending to arrange for James to be sent away, and for William Jr. to be raised by wet nurses, who would be told Catherine had died in childbirth. He would construct a story that explained the twins' different appearances, perhaps claiming James had been born to an enslaved woman at the same time, and the babies had been confused briefly. Any story was preferable to the truth. But on the night before Samuel's scheduled execution, Catherine managed to escape her locked room. She went to the jail where Samuel was held. The guard, an enslaved man named Daniel, who'd known Catherine his entire life, allowed her to enter Samuel's cell. It was a mercy that would cost Daniel severe punishment when discovered, but he allowed it nonetheless. Catherine and Samuel spoke for an hour. No record exists of what they said. But Catherine's journal entry written the next morning, before Samuel's execution, suggests the conversation was both apology and affirmation. She wrote, "I told him I was sorry. Sorry for pursuing the relationship. Sorry for causing his death. Sorry for every consequence that had followed from our time together. He told me not to apologize. He said that what we had was the only genuine human connection he'd experienced in his life of bondage. He said that if he was to die for it, then at least he would die knowing he'd been seen as human by another person, even if that person was his owner. He asked me to survive, to live for James and for William, to ensure that at least one of our sons would know something of his father and his mother, beyond lies constructed to protect reputation. I promised him I would try." Samuel was executed on March 19th, 1851, in the public square of the Thornton plantation. Over 200 enslaved people from Thornton and neighboring plantations were forced to watch. Catherine was forced to watch. William was present, supervising, ensuring the execution was conducted with maximum suffering to serve as effective deterrent to others. The method was hanging, but a form of hanging designed to extend suffering. Samuel was hoisted partially, strangling slowly rather than dying from broken neck or immediate asphyxiation. He died after approximately 15 minutes of visible agony. His body was left hanging for 3 days, as warning before being cut down and buried in an unmarked grave in the plantation cemetery. Catherine watched the entire execution. Her journal entry that night reads simply, "I have destroyed the only man who ever saw me as human. I have destroyed my child's father. I have destroyed any possibility of redemption. I will continue living because I promised Samuel I would, but I am dead inside in ways that matter more than the physical beating of a heart." James was taken from Thornton Hall on March 20th. Catherine was not allowed to say goodbye. She didn't know where he was being sent. only that William had arranged for him to be transferred to a rice plantation the family owned 30 miles inland. She would never see him again. William Jr. was raised in Thornton Hall, told that his mother had died shortly after his birth, and that he had no siblings. Catherine was allowed to remain in the house, but was forbidden from interacting with her surviving son. She existed as ghost, present but invisible, alive but not living. William filed for divorce in June 1851 on grounds of adultery. Divorce was rare but possible in South Carolina under certain circumstances, and adultery with an enslaved man was certainly grounds that any court would accept. Catherine did not contest the divorce. It was granted in August 1851. Catherine was sent to live with distant relatives in Georgia, where she existed in obscurity for the next 12 years, until her death in 1863. Her journal survived because she left it with a former servant, who preserved it, and eventually donated it to a historical society in 1927. The journal wasn't studied seriously until the 1980s, when historians began researching interracial relationships in the antebellum South. The journal revealed the full story of what had occurred at Thornton Hall in 1850 to 51. It documented Catherine's relationship with Samuel. It documented her confession and its consequences. It documented Samuel's execution and James's enslavement. And it documented Catherine's anguish at having destroyed multiple lives through actions motivated by loneliness and a desperate search for human connection in circumstances that made such connection impossible to achieve safely. The journal also raised uncomfortable questions about consent, power, and morality in slavery. Was Catherine a victim who'd sought affection in circumstances where her own marriage was essentially enslavement? Was she a perpetrator who'd used her power over Samuel to coerce a relationship that he couldn't safely refuse? Was she both? Neither. The questions resist simple answers because the circumstances resist simple, moral categorization. Samuel left no voice in the historical record beyond what Catherine reported. Whether he felt genuine affection for Catherine, or whether he was simply navigating an impossible situation where all choices carried terrible risks, is unknown. His execution served as warning to other enslaved men, reinforcing the absolute prohibition against any sexual relationship with white women, regardless of circumstances. James's fate is partially documented through plantation records. He was sent to the Thornton rice plantation, where he worked as a field laborer. Records show he was sold in 1858 to a plantation in Mississippi, where the trail goes cold. Whether he survived the Civil War, whether he ever learned his true parentage, whether he had descendants who might be alive today, are questions that cannot be answered from surviving evidence. William Thornton, Jr. grew up believing he was an only child, and that his mother had died when he was an infant. He inherited the Thornton property when William Sr. died in 1867. He married, had children, and maintained the Thornton family's position in Charleston society. He died in 1912, having never learned he'd had a twin brother, or that his mother had lived until he was 12 years old. The Thornton family suppressed the story effectively for over a century. When Catherine's journal was donated to a historical society in 1927, the family attempted to have it declared private property and returned. The attempt failed, but the family successfully lobbied to have the journal sealed from public access for 60 years. It was finally released to researchers in 1987. The journal's release prompted research into the Thornton family history and verification of Catherine's claims. Plantation records confirmed Samuel's existence and execution. Church records confirmed the birth of twins in February 1851. Court records confirmed the divorce in August 1851. Every verifiable claim in Catherine's journal was confirmed by independent documentation. Modern historians studying the case have focused on what it reveals about the complexity of relationships under slavery. The relationship between Catherine and Samuel violated every law and social norm of their time. It resulted in multiple deaths and destroyed multiple lives. Yet Catherine's journal describes it as the only genuine human connection she'd experienced, suggesting that even relationships formed in circumstances of profound power imbalance could contain elements of authentic feeling. This doesn't excuse the relationship or minimize the violence inherent in slavery, but it complicates simplistic narratives about antebellum South by showing that human feelings and human connections occurred even in circumstances designed to prevent them, and that those connections could have devastating consequences for everyone involved. The case also reveals how slavery corrupted every relationship it touched. Catherine's marriage to William was essentially ownership. Her relationship with Samuel was complicated by her ownership of him. Samuel's choices were constrained by his enslavement. Every person in the story was trapped in systems that prevented genuine autonomy, genuine consent, genuine human connection. The tragedy of the Thornton case isn't just that Samuel was executed, or that James was enslaved, or that Catherine was destroyed. The tragedy is that slavery created circumstances where people seeking human connection could find it only through relationships that violated every rule, and that would inevitably result in destruction for all involved. What do you think about the Thornton family tragedy? Was Catherine a victim of her own circumstances, or a perpetrator who used her power inappropriately? Was Samuel a victim of slavery, or a participant in a consensual relationship complicated by power dynamics? Can we make moral judgments about people operating in systems that allowed no good choices? Leave your comment below. If you found this investigation compelling, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Share this with someone who appreciates historical narratives that resist simple moral categorization. The stories that challenge us to think about power, consent, and human connection in complex circumstances are often the most important to preserve. At History in Chains, we believe in presenting history honestly, acknowledging that the past contains situations that modern moral frameworks struggle to adequately address, and preserving narratives that reveal the human costs of slavery in ways that transcend simple categories of villain and victim. See you in the next video.